This conference will now be recorded.
Hello class, this is Gabrielle Valentic, your online campus Writing Center Writing Specialist, and today I'm going to review a few resources that the Online Campus Writing Center has made available for synthesis. After we review these resources, I'll take a look at a student's paper and show you how we perform our live one-on-one reviews. So the page we're looking at here can be found on our webpage under APA and Academic and Professional Writing Resources. This is the synthesis page. And on this page, you'll find many resources that take you from the beginning of your assignment with making notes, reading, and the assignment instructions all the way through to revision. So let's take a little look here at what we have. To begin with, synthesis refers to reporting the literature in a way that compares, makes contrasts, and critically analyzing what you've found in that research. So it isn't just a summary of the research. There needs to be an overall theme and sub-ideas to this assignment that you're completing. There are 4 steps that you can follow to arrive at a well-organized and comprehensive synthesis. The first is going to be reading the literature and taking notes. There are resources here if you follow the link. Here I'm highlighting it here. Reading the literature and taking notes. You'll be able to follow that link for more strategies on critical reading and how to complete annotated entries that you can use later. The second link shows you tracking sources and themes using a literature review matrix. This will be a handout that helps you to find similarities and differences across the literature you review so that you can find those overall themes amongst the researchers who are discussing your topic. Then on this page, we share resources for creating an outline and writing with synthesis. Moving to that next subheading, in creating an outline, the first thing you need to do is to look at your notes that you took while reading. This is why taking notes while you're reading your literature is so important. In order to perform synthesis, you need to have your own ideas about the literature that you reviewed, which makes those notes critical because those are your initial impressions that you captured reading the sources. Without these notes, you'll have to look back at the literature, which may lead to you using the author's ideas rather than your own about the topic. So looking at your notes on the literature, find the ideas within those notes that were the most interesting to you. Why were they interesting? Once you have answered that question, you're ready to craft a thesis statement. The statement is the sentence that should clearly and concisely state your topic, your personal argument about that topic, and the significance. Why should the reader care about the synthesis that you're presenting? Then you'll want to create a list of sub-ideas and subtopics within that overall idea for your paper. This structure is going to be important because we're going to organize all of our literature into these topics. So think of the ideas that your reader would absolutely need to know about your main topic. What details or themes are critical to understanding it from the point of view of someone who has never read any research or is unfamiliar with the topic that you're presenting? Here we can see an example. So I have my introduction, my research strategy, which is how I found my sources, and the conceptual framework of my study. So that's the main overall theories that I'm going to use, followed by my main topic, history of on-the-job training programs. I identified 3 subtopics: experience-based training programs, simulation-based training programs, and mentorship apprenticeship-based training programs. So here, there's no reference to the literature, and this is an important thing to note. I've, in my own words, identified these ideas that I'm going to talk about. Now I'll be able to organize my literature into these ideas. This is a critical first step to take so that you have less revision to do later down the road. If you can create a short outline like this with one main idea and approximately a minimum of 3 sub-ideas, you'll be able to more easily organize your literature into your framework of understanding of the topic, rather than using the author's ideas and understanding of the topic to guide your research. So after we've created this outline, we'll think about these quick tips. You could create your outline in a Microsoft Word document using the APA headings that you're going to use once you have fleshed out the document entirely. This is a great strategy for basically filling in the blanks for your assignment and having to do less revision later. You can also fill in your outline with the notes you have taken prior to writing more about the sources. So in this way, you're not doubling up the work. A lot of the times we feel when we're doing all of that reading to begin with that it's extra work to write notes or to create an annotated bibliography where we can summarize what we read in the source. But if you use it to fill in your outline afterwards, you're actually just doing work ahead of time. You should also include your APA citation in all of the notes on your outline. This way you don't lose it, you're practicing the correct citations, and you're being sure to avoid plagiarism by immediately crediting the ideas to where they belong. When we look at 10+ page documents, sometimes we forget where the ideas were that we borrowed, and this can lead to unintentional plagiarism. So begin with the APA citations with all of your notes, and you can avoid this issue. Also, you should feel confident in your outline before you begin writing. This is important. If you don't like your outline now, chances are you're not going to like the finished product later. Be sure that you're actually discussing what you want to talk about when you create this outline. That way, when you go through with your revision, you don't have extra work to do in creating new topics or removing topics that you spent a great deal of time writing. Moving on to writing with synthesis, one of the first things that's important to do is to understand the difference between summary, paraphrasing, and synthesis itself. A summary is an overview in your own words about the important information in a source. But it's true to the original source. It doesn't contain any of your opinions or perspectives on the topic. You're basically creating a movie trailer for the source that you read. A paraphrase is an articulation in your own words and sentence structure of an important page, section, paragraph, or idea in the source. So in this capacity, we couldn't paraphrase the entire source, for example. This is less of a movie trailer and more of a clip. This is often the same length or longer than the original, but focuses only on the information that's relevant for your particular argument. So what makes a paraphrase different than a summary is a paraphrase has a purpose. You've selected the piece of information that you're paraphrasing to convince your reader of some importance in the point or to prove your own argument. Synthesis, as we reviewed, is the overall summarized and paraphrased information transformed into your interpretation. So that's that third ingredient here. It's beyond summary and paraphrase because it contains your opinion. You're essentially using someone else's research to prove your point. So synthesis can only be performed if you have an additional layer of commentary of your own on the topic, presenting your understanding of the topic and trying to convince your reader of its validity. So here is a graph that we can use to kind of understand the basics between summary and synthesis. A summary is only a recap of the main points of a source or multiple sources. However, synthesis is integrated themes based on multiple sources. So I'm never summarizing a single source in synthesis. It isn't possible to perform synthesis without multiple sources. Summary is a brief statement or restatement of a source, but synthesis is a complex whole formed by combining separate materials into unified entities. That's a fancy way of saying I need to use multiple sources to describe one topic to perform synthesis. This creates the construct of validity in your argument. If multiple people are saying the same thing, you're more likely to be believed. That's the value of synthesis in your writing. Summary explains and describes what the main ideas are, but synthesis conveys what you think about those relevant ideas, themes, trends, or theories, or the methods that were used in the studies. Essentially, synthesis is your interpretation of the importance and the validity of those sources. So your opinion must be present to have synthesis. Finally, summary is a faithful representation of the original author's ideas. There's no place for opinion in summary. You should just be presenting the author's ideas in the same tone and evaluation that they did. For synthesis, though, you can combine your opinion and their opinion. If their opinion agrees with yours, synthesis is your place to say that. If you disagree, synthesis is also a place where you can discuss why you feel that another source is more valid, or why one source is not as important as another. The idea is to perform one uniform discussion of a topic using multiple sources to prove your point. In order to do this, we have to paraphrase. Paraphrasing is a higher order writing skill, so it can be kind of difficult. But for synthesis, it's very important because we have to be using our own opinions. This means we should have relatively little quoting and much more paraphrase of the sources. If we're using a great deal of quotes in our synthesis, we're presenting others' ideas rather than our own. So paraphrasing is important here because it's adding that third layer that creates synthesis, our perspective on the relevant ideas, themes, and trends. So here are some processing tips for paraphrasing. Once you have found something that you like in your source, read the original passage several times through so that you are sure you understand it. But then put it away. Stop looking at it, turn the page over, or put it in another room, close the document on your computer, and write how you interpret that in your own words. Think about it as telling a friend about the passage over coffee. You don't have it in front of you, but you need to explain the most significant parts of it and why you found it significant. This will ensure that you are paraphrasing in your own words and your own sentence structure. Proper paraphrase means that you haven't just switched out the words in a sentence while retaining the original sentence structure. That is a type of plagiarism and won't qualify for synthesis level paraphrasing. So you'll want to make sure you follow these steps so that you have your own sentence structure when you're describing sources or writing the idea in your own words. So here are some paraphrase templates you can use to begin practicing paraphrasing and avoiding plagiarism. In the putting away of the document, you can then look at these questions and answer them to help you create sentences. So for example, in paraphrase template option 1, we can answer questions such as who said it, provide the author's names and their credentials to support your argument's credibility. Then we can choose a signal verb or how they said it. We're going to choose a talking verb that explains the author's purpose. Were they agreeing with another source? Were they interpreting data? Were they discussing new ideas, proving an argument? You decide what their point was and then pick one of these talking verbs from this list. This will help you start to create a conversation between sources. These signal verbs can help you to create connections between authors that agree with each other, authors that disagree with each other, authors that are introducing new points. They're the little connective tissues that help your reader to understand the overall themes between the ideas. Once you've picked that verb, then you're going to, in your own words, describe what they said. So explain, looking away from the original, what you read. Finally, to perform proper paraphrase, you need to explain why it was interesting. Use a phrase or a clause to explain what the implications of what the authors have stated is. To whom is the information significant? Why? This last component ensures that you're avoiding plagiarism and you're entering the levels of synthesis. Now I'm not just summarizing what they said, I'm explaining its overall relevance to the theme that I'm discussing inside of my paper. In the second option, we're just making a little bit of a shorter paraphrase. So rather than beginning our sentence with discussing who said it, I'm going to begin with what they said. So I'm going to introduce the ideas in my own writing, again looking away from that passage. Then I'm going to explain why it was interesting, noting what the implications were of the data, stating why the argument was significant and to whom. And then I'm going to make an explicit connection to my own argument. I'm going to use a phrase to explain why the paraphrased information is important to the theme of my literature review. In other words, how does it prove my point? Then I will complete my paraphrase with an in-text citation that's in parentheses the author's names, the year, and relevant page numbers. We'll take a look at that here. So here's a passage that these two paraphrases have come from. The original passage is stated first, along with the full reference entry, and here's the translation into paraphrase option 1. Block, a leading ESL researcher, claims that plagiarism definitions are informed by cultural traditions, which is important when considering how to teach non-native students in the West. So here we can see that I've begun with the researcher. I chose claims that to explain that the researcher is making an argument. I've explained what they said, and I gave a detail on why it's interesting. This part wasn't contained in the original passage. This is my interpretation of why what Block said is interesting. Here, in paraphrase option 2, plagiarism definitions are informed by cultural traditions, which is important when considering how to teach non-native students in the West, and explains why it is necessary to directly explain Western plagiarism to writing students, ending with my parenthetical citation. So here I've given even more of my own ideas, using the author's idea as a start, as a point of validity to explain why my opinion matters, and focusing on how the source proves my overall argument, that it's necessary to directly explain plagiarism. These two paraphrase options are great practice opportunities. You certainly are not restricted to this exact structure over and over again inside of your writing. These are designed to give you an idea of how you can order your sentences and diversify your structure so you're not always starting with the author's names or always concluding with a parenthetical citation. You want to give your reader some diversity in your writing, so that way as they're reading, there's flow and cohesion and nothing seems repetitive or redundant, which could lead them away from your writing. After we've mastered these skills, we want to identify and correct some common synthesis errors. So here are some common errors that are important to avoid. Let me zoom in a little bit here. The first is a tendency to choose to report rather than to analyze. This is the difference between summary and synthesis here. Reporting would be summary, and analysis would be synthesis. So in this example, Franz studied undergraduate online students. He looked at 17 females and 18 males and found that none of them liked APA. According to Franz, the evidence suggested that all students are reluctant to learn the citation style. This is grammatically correct. However, all I've done is summarize this author's work. I haven't analyzed its significance, explained my overall interest in it. I've only reported the author's findings. This makes this a summary and not synthesis. I also want to avoid the tendency to organize by summarizing author by author. So this is where I've only put one author per paragraph, discussing a single study within individual paragraphs. By nature, this makes my writing not synthesis. If I'm only discussing one study at a time, focusing on the study rather than the idea, I'm just performing isolated summary. They may have similar ideas from paragraph to paragraph, but if I'm not using multiple authors inside of one paragraph to describe an idea, I have not synthesized the material quite yet. So as you're revising, if you're looking at your paragraphs and noting only one single author cited per paragraph, you know you have a little extra work to do in your synthesis. You should be organizing your paper by subtopics like we did at the beginning, and then filling in those subtopics with at least 2 different citations per paragraph. This is important in order to perform synthesis. It's also important to have a unifying theme. We want to avoid a lack thereof. So here in this example, Perez also studied undergraduate students. She looked at 42 females and 50 males and found that males were significantly more inclined to use citation software. Findings also suggested that females might graduate sooner. It's pretty impossible for my reader to find out what my unifying theme or my idea is based on this. There's a lot of ideas present without transitions between them and without a connection to my overall perspective. This lack of unifying theme could lead the reader to cast off important information because they can't figure out how to connect it to the prior information. It's also important to avoid paralyzing or variance for the literature. So, for example, if I say Goldstein, a maven of the field of psychology, notably recorded remarkable data that showed among a sample of 50 students, all females were confident in their abilities to cite in APA style. It's much too overboard in discussing the value of the source. Typically, your reader is going to be familiar with APA. As such, they're going to be familiar with the requirement that you use scholarly sources. This means that we're not using things like Wikipedia or basic web pages in our writing. Because of this, we don't need to overly emphasize the credibility of our source. Our author trusts us in order to put those into the writing. So we don't need any extra words or phrases to overemphasize exactly how important the source is to the field. A few mistakes to avoid include over-reliance on one source. So we don't want to repetitively list the author at the start of every sentence. So for example, Marshall has found that. Marshall also discovered a relationship between. Marshall's study further revealed that. This is too much over-reliance on this singular source. I should be alternating between my sources and my synthesis. So 3 direct references to the author back to back to back like this is too much in order for me to be performing synthesis. For example, I could insert someone else's ideas between a few of these in order to diversify my source usage and to build a more cohesive synthesis of the topic. We also want to avoid faulty quotations. This includes beginning a sentence with a direct quote or stringing quotes together without analysis. If you begin a sentence with a direct quote, you haven't framed that source for your reader. This means that they're going to read that quote and interpret it with their own lens and ideas about the ideas that are presented in the source. This leaves us missing valuable time that we could prepare our reader to read the source material with our perspective in mind. Here, stringing quotes together without analysis also just uses the author's words and doesn't explain their connection to our writing. So undergraduates are underprepared for academic writing, Perez. Importantly, not all students are aware of resources, Franz. Students must utilize resources to be successful, Goldstein. So here I've used small snippets of multiple sources to explain what I want to discuss. Here a paraphrase would be much more powerful, where I explained where I got my material, but also made a connection to my overall idea. We also want to avoid the overuse of direct quotes. This is our synthesis of a topic. As such, it should be mostly our own words using sources just to back up our opinion. Big block quotes should be primarily avoided. If you have to use a block quote, consider using only 1 per 10 pages. The final mistake to avoid is hesitation to assert an argument or the tendency to describe contents without a purpose. So for example, describing, this literature review presents information on the history of ABA and emerging practices. This isn't really asserting an argument. This is stating a fact. Asserting an argument would be something like, this literature review explores the history of ABA and asserts a gap in research related to emerging ABA practices for elementary-aged students with autism. Here, I've made a claim that there's a gap in research. This is a very common claim in terms of a literature review and synthesizing sources altogether. So it's okay if you wanted to utilize this particular argument. You would just have to specify the specific gap that you're going to be answering. Following, we're going to look at understanding how to organize based on theme, not by author. So as we discussed, in a singular paragraph, we should have multiple authors. This means we need to identify subtopics or themes that we can use in order to be sure that we are not summarizing each individual source by source throughout our paper. So for example, here is something that would not be synthesis. Franz studied undergraduate online students. He looked at 17 females and 18 males and found that none of them liked APA. According to Franz, the evidence suggested that all students are reluctant to learn citation styles. Perez also studied undergraduate students. She looked at 42 males and 50 females and found that males were significantly more inclined to use citation software. Findings suggested that females might graduate sooner. Goldstein looked at British undergraduates. Among a sample of 50, all females, all were confident in their abilities to cite and were eager to write their dissertations. So here, my paragraphs only utilize single sources. I haven't created a synthesis where I'm explaining a theme that all of these authors are contributing to. This leaves my reader uncertain as to what my overall idea is.
This conference will now be recorded.
I apologize for that brief break. Even the best of us get afflicted by presentation. Moving forward, to review, the first example is not synthesis. This is because I have individual authors presented in singular analysis. Here, I've created no unifying theme amongst the authors. I have not used them to show any kind of argument about the topic. I've only summarized their ideas in an unrelated manner. To perform synthesis, I could do something like this. Studies of undergraduate students reveal conflicting conclusions regarding relationships between advanced scholarly study and citation efficacy. Although France found that no participants enjoyed learning citation style, Goldstein determined in a larger study that all participants watched felt comfortable citing sources, suggesting that variables among participant and control group populations must be examined more closely. Although Perez expanded on Franz's original study with a larger, more diverse sample, and so on. Here you can see how I've utilized transitions to explain the relationship between the sources. By saying, although Franz and Goldstein determined, I've created a sort of contradiction between these two sources, explaining that there's some conflicting ideas going on about studies of undergraduate students and advanced scholarly study. Here I've used although Perez expanded on Franz's original study to create a direct conversation between those two sources. This is synthesis. I've used my sources to describe an overall idea, the relationships between advanced scholarly study and citation efficacy. I started by listing this idea. Then I went through my sources and explained their relationship to the idea and their relationship to each other. Something that can help when you're performing your literature review is understanding your point of view. So we've talked a lot about how synthesis has to include your opinion. What does that mean? That means that you have to decide which of these roles that you play when you're presenting your literature review to your reader. Are you the detective, identifying a research problem, drawing key ideas from the literature about that problem, and connecting those ideas into a logical narrative? Or are you the analyst? Are you building your case about connections between key ideas? Are you persuading your readers with your logical narrative? In other words, are you using an analysis of others' ideas to prove your own argument? Or are you the narrator? Are you seeing relationships between sources? Are you fitting their pieces together to reveal the overall topic or the research that's been done on the field, stating your knowledge of this topic? So you're avoiding forcing a relationship if one is not apparent. You're willing to drop a source if it does not play a logical role in the story. And you're finding relationships that are not only interesting, but relevant to your study's focus. Deciding upon your role can help you to understand how to answer questions like, how does this source connect to my study when you're paraphrasing? To conclude this page, we have some templates to show you how to begin to synthesize. So just like our paraphrase templates that we looked at, these templates are not designed to be a restrictive way of showing you how to write each one of your paragraphs. They're just designed to give you some practice putting the pieces of synthesis together. So here's the template. Here is my topic. which is significant because of this eye-catching fact or important detail. It has been shown that this important finding about my topic, followed by my parenthetical citation. Author 2 and author 3 also revealed in their research this second important fact about the topic. Inserting a relationship transition to explain how this next source is related to the prior, author 4 et al. Have noted a third important fact about the topic. Finally, a summative transition to conclude it. Therefore, practitioners should know, here is the connection between the importance of the topic to the overall argument that my writer wants to make. So here, this is sort of like a fill-in-the-blank template, right? We're explaining the relationship between the ideas. When you're revising, this is an excellent template to check and see if your paragraphs have all the necessary components of synthesis. You can use the paragraph you've already written and insert the material into these highlighted spots to see if you have all of them. If you're stuck, or if you found that maybe you don't have an additive transition or a summative transition, you could answer these questions for generating synthesis. For example, what is my topic for this paragraph? What is its significance to my overall argument? What researchers or sources talk about this topic? What are the important things my reader should know about this topic? What is the relationship between my sources? Do they agree or contradict? These questions can help you to fill in these blanks. Here's an example of a completed synthesis paragraph. The use of synthesis is important because it strengthens a writer's overall argument. It has been shown that synthesis puts sources into conversation with each other, creating convincing consensus. Citation. Marshall and Valentic also revealed in their research that synthesis of sources can make the author of a paper seem more credible. Moreover, Marshall et al. Have noted that synthesis is also needed to prove why the author's opinion matters through contextualization within prior research. Therefore, writers should know that synthesis is a higher order writing skill that yields higher quality arguments and powerful persuasive written text. Here, I can go through this checklist and ensure that I have all of the necessary components. So the first one, I introduced a clear topic in the first sentence, the use of synthesis. I used more than one source to describe my topic. With the purple highlighting, we can see that I used 3 sources. I described important findings about the topic rather than describing the studies. Looking at the yellow highlighting, we can see that I described the ideas that the authors talked about, but I didn't discuss their studies. I used transitions between each study to show how they relate to each other. So here, using the blue highlighting, we can see 3 transitions, which is good because I have 3 sources. This means that I probably used enough transitions to explain the relationships between the sources that I used in my synthesis. I finished the paragraph with a summative connection to my paper's main argument. I did. Synthesis is a higher order writing skill that yields higher quality arguments and powerful persuasive written text. So here we can see that I have completed my checklist for synthesis, and this is a good example paragraph to use when comparing our own writing to here. Moving forward, we're going to take a look at a student sample paper. I'm going to give you an idea of what Online Campus Writing Center feedback looks like, how it works, and what we look for when we're examining if synthesis is present in someone's literature review. Give me one moment and I will pull that up.